Hello, this is my supercritical fluid self-sustaining generator. I'm very proud of this. Probably one of my favorite inventions over the last 5 or 6 years. In high school, we learned about pulleys in the 6th grade, not high school. And I said, it's like, wow, that's a secret to, well, free energy. But it's not actually free energy. See, as long as you have two input sources of energy, you are capable of sustaining electrical generation indefinitely. The largest flaw of these is cooling cycle. But my two input sources were heat and gravity. And this creates a supercritical fluid out of CO2. The only flaw I've ever found with it is that it has to be under 850 or 950 psi of pressure. And that's the only reason why I haven't built it. And I'll explain how it works and how I used pulleys to trick it. And why is it modeled after a pyramid is because at the time that I was starting to develop this idea, I was really into how I could imagine the pyramids were generators. And still to this day, there are different ways that you could use them to develop energy through, piezo harmonic electric effect. But anyway, that's enough of that magic stuff. So this is modeled after Earth's water cycle, and it basically is a supercritical fluid distillery. So you have your CO2, you pressurize it, it creates a fluid. As long as you heat that fluid here, pressure will want to expand outwardly. Gas may expand into this chamber, but for the most part, it will create the same flow of volume of mass as gas up this central chamber. That's your heater element. Heat can be applied here if you wish, which is a foundation source of energy. The generation of electricity can also heat the gas to move it. And so once you fill this up, your chamber comes up. This one is designed to spin, and this one is designed to drop. So as the length of this travels, your pulley would allow this to accelerate cumulatively based on its application of force from gravity. Gravity pulls this down, this spins, and it generates DC and AC. And I was working out different ways that you could do it. Once you quantify it, then it can be stacked in all sorts of different manners. Another way I was trying to imagine is using a transmission with two separate pulley systems, so that as one drops, the other one, it's sort of flipped over, and as it drops, it rewraps the cables. That I can never actually do anything to figure out. There's lots of different ways that you can use supercritical fluid, CO2, to generate electricity. But I like drawing it out of my head. I don't take things too seriously. But I know this will work. As I said, it's modeled after Earth's water cycle with 2 input sources of energy. And the only issue is the cooling cycle. So as this drops, this needs to convert back to a fluid from a gas. And the expansion of it into its storage chamber acts as an expanding, so it expands and then, you know, cools through movement, storage, cooling again, drops down, and you know, aerogel insulation and other things. So, well, I was working out like thermal valves too. I used to use a thermometer to electromagnetically move a valve to close and lock and regulate temperature and other things. Now, this is just the basics that I'm going over. And you can see here, this is the basic concept for self-sustainable energy. So you have 2 input sources that you can sustain. And energy creates less gravity. Source input plus, I don't know, maybe that stands for height. I don't remember what the variables were. Oh, all right, there you go. Step resistance, rotation, pressure, heat, and density. And if you know anything about Feynman diagrams, then you know that in theory, Feynman diagrams represent a perpetual give and take of input to output. So my whole philosophy of this is that, what was I going to say? We're considering different material. Oh, okay, yeah. So you have your input and your output, and that multiplies. And if you look at electricity like waste, then a lot of energy sources use heat as waste. Like internal combustion engines, heat is waste. It's useless. So you input your gravitational force, you input heat, and you can outtake energy. And because we have, well, a fairly indefinite supply, and these are older drawings of it. These ones are nothing too special. That's something else I might get into. That is anti-gravity. But that's pretty much it. It's really not too complicated. It's not something I need to talk about for a long time. But that's the basic concepts. Foundation is self-sustainable electrical generation. This will work anywhere on Earth and in any gravitational field. And see, I was trying to make it work in space. I could not figure it out. I had to start with, let's see, where's the math of that? I have a whole fucking area. I was working out a lot of math for it. But I think I split it up over here, yeah. So this is me trying to make it work in a void without gravity. Creating a monopolar core that you can build up, and then you layer this over and over and over again, and it's complicated. I think that's everything. why I've never built it is because, well, one, humanity is not ready for free energy. But then you go to the rationality, we will or will not destroy ourselves either way, so what's the point? And this is supposed to be like the chamber and other little things that you can do with it to create different brush systems for dropping and different renditions of Tesla valves. Oh yeah, that was another thing. Tesla valves. It takes a helically wrapped Tesla valve. Of course, the 3D printed version of a Tesla valve I have, this does not work, but it's not a perfect one. So maybe they don't even work. I don't know. I've never had my hands on one to verify it. But other videos online claim that they will work. But pressure is a funny thing. So a Tesla valve works in theory just as anything does, as long as you don't have enough pressure, right? That what velocity of air is rerouted back to apply resistance, and that a greater pressure on one end can allow flow. But it just mixes things really well, and honestly I don't think it works. But let's see what else. Essentially any valve. These so then you can run your electrical current through the main shaft and the heater element, and the friction of it through thermal capacitors will allow you to store heat and discharge heat in here to remain constant, and to regulate, I mean, so it doesn't get too cool. But the best part about this is it works between 60 and, what was it, like 67 degrees to 69 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Is the try point, I think, for supercritical fluid. CO2. And then at room temperature, it's what, 15 bar. Oh, 15 times 15. I don't think if there's anything else I've missed. It's really simple. Yes. And definitely would help better humanity. Yeah, here you go, see? This is me trying to figure out a pressure regulating thermal circuit. So it regulates pressure and thermal energy. I don't know. Once you start getting into the math, the tubing, it's a lot of tubing, but you can make it fairly small. It'll definitely work. I've done the math 1,000 times in my head over and over and over again for years. So I am certain that it will work. A lot of people who I have told it to, oh, there's friction, bro. There's friction. This won't work. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not a perfect free self-sustaining spring. It's not like it's just gonna, it has two constant input sources of energy. So the issue with this is increasing. So as this rotates, if you look at its rotational distance, similar to linear distance, then it's the exact same thing as a pulley line. So you can make this drop an inch, and this can drop 1,000 feet if you want it to, basically. Similar. It's like a gear reduction is all it is. But the gear reduction can flop, and so as mass is cycled. That's why I always called it a cyclic mass generator. Nobody understood what I was saying. It's always funny to fuck with people like that. They call it modern physics, right? As this drops, it's emptied, which is why you need it to return to a fluid. And it's dropped, cooling phase, fluid, and just enough heat, essentially. You know, I never got to experiment with it, but I assume that just enough heat around this will create a convection current in a superfluid state, because all it takes is like 2 or 3 degrees. It's ridiculous. And so, you know, you empty that, this is filled and drops and goes back up, and this is empties, and this is full, and it's just the water cycle, except with supercritical CO2. And we use so much CO2. There's what, I think I calculated something about 1 billion gallons a year of CO2 that nobody knows what to do with. And oh boy, the next video will be my wheel, but this one I'm really proud of. I don't know how nobody else has figured this out, but nobody gives up on it. And you know, you could put one of these in your house, in your car, you can put it anywhere you want. The only issue is cooling phase. You know, it's to isolate the chamber from outside temperatures. It takes a good insulator, and so that insulator will store heat in the chamber, or the outside will be too hot and turn the chamber into a super fluid state, supercritical fluid. There you go. What other issues were there? Not too many, just pretty much that. It's figuring out an efficient enough cooling cycle. Ideally, you want this to drop as far as possible, and this to drop as far as possible. And that increases its velocity, and so as long as you do that, then you increase the duration for cooling while sustaining the generation of electricity. So these chambers obviously need to be very well insulated, which then stores the heat. So it's just the funniest thing. So once it's stored, I mean, it doesn't want to cool back down, right? And there's always a paradox, but I am very confident that this is a foundation and a concept for self-sustainable energy that is clean. That's the most important part. It is really, really clean. And it uses all that gas that we just keep making. Now, in terms of how to structure civilization, well, if you look at this like a windmill, 100 years ago, windmills were popping up farms all over, and well, society never collapsed. People had their own wells. Civilization still prospered and expanded. The thing is that these would allow us, each person, to generate a margin of electricity that, when you look at the main structure of society, how we provide electricity, that if that were to fail now, everything would just fall the fuck apart like COVID did. But if people have a way to compensate for lost amperage and fluctuations in electrical usage, then it's a very self-sustainable method for society. And so I mostly spent the time focusing on philosophy and how to structure civilization without simply just being Nikola Tesla and believing everybody should just instantly have this without understanding why and how it can function to prevent collapse. And so essentially this functions kind of like this, if you look at a concept, that each one of these can generate and compensate, and when one is cooling, then another one is powering, and another one's cooling, and another one's powering, and another one's cooling. And everybody working together compensates for a lack of providable energy through the main structure that we have today. When a reservoir runs too low, or a dam runs too low, which is the same thing, or silly. But look at this guy. He's always giving me a face. You know, every time I look at him, he's giving me a different face. I look at him and he's judging me 1 minute. Why are you talking about this? So this uses one of our biggest weaknesses as a strength. It uses carbon dioxide, our major greenhouse gas. Everybody's like, why don't we just have more trees? Well, I can get into that too, but I'm rambling now for 21 minutes. And I feel like I haven't said anything, but there are other systems I've devised to compensate for that too as well. And ugh, I made my drink too strong. But like I was saying, so it's just not just total independence from constructive industry and electricity. This with everybody having it wouldn't supply enough energy. But if you look at it like a hybrid car, the electric motors provide a massive increased energy and performance even to an all-wheel drive system versus the internal combustion, which is there as a reliable source that we know and have developed. You can't simply just have an electric car, and you can't just have an internal combustion engine anymore. But together, they really help well. So if everybody had something like this, or just an improved version of it, I'm not saying you need my design. That's why I designed the concept. And I mean, mankind can, each person use this, and then it's like a rubber band, you know. It's that same old back and forth. Two input sources create sustainable nature. It's reliant on manufacturing, so society won't become too dependent on it, as if, say, the pyramids were generators for a civilization, had they actually been. I'm not saying that they were. It's just when I create the plausibility in my head, I run through countless options, and I look at maybe they could have sustained a utopian design society, and everybody lost the technology, so they collapsed. Well, this relies on people still knowing how it functions and why it functions. And if one person forgets how this functions at home, you have the main structure, and these are all, say, basically wired in series together. So then everybody is working together with the main structure, and it creates just the strongest format for society that I could ever imagine. And people can have what they want. People can sleep a little bit longer, or you don't have to be so vindictive when it comes to a fucking appointment or getting your goddamn car license or whatever else. It's just, there in case we need it. And there might be a time when my work, my philosophy, and all the things that I've focused on become viable. And it doesn't mean it's right now, but it keeps people working together. And so, say in my neighborhood, there are 20, 30 different homes. Most of them are vacant right now. Every one of these generators could still be producing power that nobody else is using, that then isn't necessarily stored, but generates on a need-to-use basis. So then you're not... Well, right now, the reservoirs are constantly producing energy. We don't have superconducting capacitors to store that energy that is excess. It kind of just disappears and goes to waste. Anyway, I think that's all I needed to say. So, just, let me just say, if you are going to pursue anything like this holistically, that you need to focus on the philosophy as much, which takes self-awareness. And self-awareness is key, as I've said. And self-awareness relates to a self-aware society, which is what it means to be human. And self-sustainability is key, right? Because then we can all function. Take care.